this last panel is where do we go from here? And that, of course, is an enormous and contested question. And just considering the variety of issues and approaches to addressing affordability of housing would produce a much longer list than I have time to read today. Strategies for housing production include nonprofit development, development on city-owned land of 100% affordable housing, state and federal subsidies, for-profit development of affordable units in otherwise market-rate developments, following the model of certain successful European cities like Vienna, Austria, in building social housing, that is, housing that's constructed by the government. Co-housing as a possibility that works in some areas. My daughter lives in co-housing in Oakland. And land trusts as an interesting vehicle. So, and then there are a big series of questions. Where will new housing go? Will there be enough water? How will new housing affect neighborhoods and communities? Traffic, carbon dioxide, and climate change. So we can only scratch the surface here. I'm very glad we're having this conversation. We have three panelists, one of whom, Tom Stagg, isn't here, and I'm going to sort of, in honor of him having taken the trouble to put his presentation together, at least display his slides. And then we'll hear from Diana Alfaro and Bruce Van Allen. So Tom is with Housing Matters. I can go ahead, and I'm not really going to talk about it, but just show you what sorts of things he had in mind. Housing Matters partners with individuals and families to create pathways out of their homelessness into permanent housing. They do scattered site housing to find units on the open market, individualized support for 1 to 2 years. They have created 171 households in housing markets since 2023 and have used affordable housing vouchers. You can see here the placement breakdown, which I kind of find hard to follow, and we'd have to look at more closely.
Basically, it's showing like different years of our success in housing over each year. So you can see the top one is in regards to households. The bottom one is in regards to like specific individuals. So like a household might consist of like, you know, a family of 4 people. That would be considered, well, one count. That's the top row. But then we also have individuals where we actually count like each individual that we've housed through there. And so that's how kind of like you can see there. And that's pretty much up to, I think, yeah, October 7th.
Okay.
Day.
All right, thanks.
So as you can see from the last couple of years comparison, we've increased, we've been much more successful over the past year in housing.
That's, yes, good to see. All right, thank you. They are headed towards development of more permanent supportive housing, housing with services on site, no time limit, renewable leases, 100% dedicated to people exiting homelessness is a possibility. And there are a couple of examples in Casa Azul, 7 apartments with HUD rental assistance or housing choice vouchers with lease agreements. There are the Harvey West Studios, which are 120 studio apartments on the Housing Matters campus, also with social services and medical services, really important, partnering with the County of Santa Cruz Health Services Agency, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and HUD. Affordable and mixed housing, dedicated units in residential developments, again, supportive services for people exiting homelessness, connecting housing developers and housing providers to service providers, and housing throughout the community. The benefits are service providers focus on support for people in housing, on-site or centralized housing support and co-location with partners, community integration in mixed income communities. Units have a long-term commitment to housing people who have exited homelessness, and can reduce the demand for emergency shelter beds. So this is one really important example, in part because it is a transition, it is a model for transitioning people out of homelessness, specifically into housing. Please don't ask me any questions. But I appreciate Tom putting this together, and I thank you for your clarification and elaboration. We'll have two more presentations and then have time for questions about this specific panel, and then a longer discussion.
I could say one thing about scattered site housing.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why I think and why we really try to focus on scattered site housing is because we really want to have a solution to homelessness as not just be like building up more affordable housing units, but also where, like, you know, because essentially like that's also can be a form of segregation in a sense. And so by having scattered site housing, it allows people to be integrated into their communities and therefore be more of a part of it rather than be seen as possibly separating from it. And this allows not only for, like, you know, to feel more included in their community, but also provides some opportunities for growth. In some ways that, like, you know, we have seen where in urban cities where, you know, you've had, there's been incidents where kids from, like, you know, poor neighborhoods with schools that are lesser funded have had opportunities to go to better funded schools, rather than, you know, parents in the better funded schools were afraid that, like, oh, these inner city kids are gonna drag down our students, rather because of the social, the better education and the social connections that kids from, like, poor neighborhoods made with the richer kids, they were able to, like, increase their social and economic mobility. And so scattered site housing also provides that as an option as well.
So we will turn now to Diana Alfaro. She has over 13 years of experience in all aspects of affordable housing development. Diana got her start through a California Coalition for Rural Housing internship, working at Mid-Penn Housing's Santa Cruz County office. She was then hired by Mid-Penn, where she helped develop over 600 units of affordable housing in Santa Cruz and other counties. She is a lead of Santa Cruz YIMBY, a member of Affordable Housing Now, and a founding member of Housing Santa Cruz County. She has also served on the Santa Cruz County Latino Affairs Commission, and most recently, she joined Workbench as a development manager. I'm very happy personally to say. So without further ado, Diana, and I'll get you slides.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you today. First of all, I need to give a shout out to whoever made those oatmeal raisin cookies, because those were legit. Yes. All right, so I've basically done affordable housing since college. That was my first job, and I finally just started my second job out of college a few months ago, and that's the only thing I know how to do. So if you have questions about ADUs, I cannot help you. I'm sorry. But my goal here today is to really talk to you about the affordable housing process, from dirt to an actual building with people living in them. And I'm gonna highlight some of the challenges, but my goal is really to give you a glimpse into that whole process and the timeline and what that looks like and what are some of the struggles that we see. So with that, I'm gonna go on to the next slide. Thank you. So first, you need a site. You need some land. And it really depends who owns that piece of land, whether it's a local jurisdiction like a city or county or state, or if it's a regular Joe. So, and that's gonna really dictate the price of that piece of land. So if it's going to be, so if it's owned by a jurisdiction, for example, chances are it's gonna be a ground lease. They're gonna do a long-term ground lease for 99 years for about $1 a year. Okay, great. So that means that keeps the price of a development down. If it's a regular Joe, well, it's whatever they think the price is. So if they think a price, their piece of land is worth $10 million, you have to convince them why it is or it isn't worth $10 million. So that's one thing. So there are some great folks out there who want to create more affordable housing opportunities. There are some nonprofits like churches who want to create more affordable housing opportunities for their members or the community, and so those are definitely great partners to create affordable housing with. And you hear this all the time from real estate agents, location, location, location. It actually really matters. Location is really big here. You have to be close to transit amenities, grocery stores, libraries, schools, pharmacies, hospitals, all these types of things. Otherwise, your funding, you won't be able to get financing for this type of housing. And I'll give you an example of that. So for example, the low-income housing tax credit program, the state of California has very prescriptive things to get points for this thing. And you have to have a perfect score to get any tax credits or to be eligible to get any tax credit awards. So for example, under transit, if you want to get the max amount of points, you have to have 25 units to the acre. And transit has to come by every 30 minutes during peak hours between 7 to 9 and 4 to 6. If you can't meet that, and by the way, a lot of Santa Cruz County does not meet that, then you can't get that. Another example, I'm gonna give you the grocery store. The grocery store must be 25,000 square feet, must provide staples like meat and fruit and vegetables, and has to accept EBT payments. The Safeway on Morrissey is for 25,046 square feet. It is my favorite number in the world because otherwise you wouldn't be able to qualify. So like Whole Foods doesn't qualify. And by the way, just because there's 5 grocery stores close by that could add up to that square footage, it doesn't matter. It has to be that one grocery store. Yeah. And also it talks about the site characteristics matter. Are you building on flat land? Are you building on a slope? Building on this is cheaper than building on this. And if you want to see an example of something being built on a slope, go to Miles Lane right now. They like to call them the great, retaining walls of Watsonville, because there are 72 units of housing being built there right now. Okay, so now we have to understand site feasibility. And so when we look at this, we look at the units, amount of units that we can build there. So we talk to an architect and say like, hey, here's an acre. Okay, how many units can we fit there? And by the way, we're gonna have seniors, or we're gonna have families, or we're gonna have supportive housing here. How much can we do here? And it also impacts the AMI levels that you're gonna see there, and it's gonna be very evident in the next slides that are coming up. We look at the potential funding sources when we're looking at this. We look at the construction costs of similar projects in the region and other soft costs to make this happen, but also operating costs, which I will go into more detail later on, and the services requirements. So the type of services that you provide for a family housing project is going to be very different from the services requirements for a supportive housing requirement, right, project. So for example, family project, you're gonna have most likely after school programs, ESL classes we've done in Watsonville. For senior housing, we'd probably have some sort of adult education, bingo nights. Special needs housing, you're gonna see more case management. You're gonna see some more of that, a social worker type housing where they're going to show up and there's going to be a case manager and they're going to talk to the residents about how to deal with your PTSD or how to connect with other folks to deal with like how your medication and whatnot. So there's that, and then we do a cash flow analysis, and this is where a lot of projects die. They die on a spreadsheet. The ones that you see at a community meeting, those are the lucky ones. So a lot of people say, hey, I want this site here. We can build 30 units of housing. Okay, cool, great. We do the analysis. It's gonna be for seniors. We can't make it cash flow because what we do is we look at, the project has to stand alone. With the rents that are coming in from that development, plus the expenses that are coming out, you're paying to manage it, to have that elevator contract, to have the landscaper come by, all those services that you're providing on site. You have to make sure it cash flows for 30 years. Not 10, not 5, 30. And that's where a lot of projects don't pencil out. So that term penciling out, we're really looking at the cash flow. It's really been in the last few years with supply chain issues and whatnot that we're starting to see projects not pencil out because it costs a lot to build it. So when you're hearing 10 years ago, like cash, it doesn't pencil out, it's cash flow. So I'm gonna talk about the different types of housing. And again, this is mostly dictated by the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which has created millions of housing units throughout the country since its inception in 1986. And so to be considered a family project, 25% of the units must be 3 bedrooms. So pop quiz, I have 50 units. How many units have to be 3 bedrooms or larger?
12 and a half.
No. Why? Is there such a thing as half a unit?
Right.
Right, so 13. So the next same thing. 25% of the units have to be 2 bedrooms, and then the balance can be all 1 bedrooms or studios or 2 bedrooms or whatever. So those 26 units, half of those have to be 3, half of those have to be 2, and then the rest you can do basically whatever you want. You have to have recreational activities for children between certain ages, so young children and older children. And you have to have laundry facilities with at least 1 washer and dryer for every 10 units. I would say more if you're in a farm worker housing population, because they do their laundry every weekend without fail. And so a lot of the projects that I worked on previously in the Watsonville area or Castroville, we would provide in-unit laundry, which is also an option. Seniors. Okay, this is the only group I can discriminate against because the head of household must be 62 and older. And seniors have a really hard time finding housing because of fixed incomes, right? So the head of household must be 62 years or older to qualify. And so it doesn't matter if their partner is 35. Yet the head of household is the one who applies. If you have a project that's over 2 stories, then you have to have an elevator. Again, that's to encourage aging in place. No more than 20% of the units can be larger than 1 bedrooms. Again, we're trying to have more 1-bedroom units to have those smaller units. It's very rare, but I have seen this, to have seniors with a child. And sometimes there are some seniors that need a worker that comes by, a caregiver of some sort. There's a call system if you have a frail elderly population, just to make sure that emergency services can come by quickly. And then here the laundry facilities changed. You can go to 15 because it's 1 person, right? There aren't that many folks doing laundry every day, and they can do it any day of the week, not necessarily on the weekends. And special needs. So the hardest to build for, and here are the reasons why. So they have to have an average income of no more than 40% of area median income. All right, so that means the AMIs have to be low. That's great, but it means it requires a ton of subsidies. So it is so great to be in Santa Cruz County, where I believe that we're called a move to work county. I'm gonna confirm that title there, but basically it means that they want to project-based more units to encourage more types of, more folks to get into housing. You have to have third-party verification on the appropriate services for that target population. So now you're working with other people, you're bringing other people in to double check on those services. You have to have proof that this project can cash flow with the rent. So if you don't have subsidy, you have to figure out how it's going to cash flow. Laundry thing, still the same as the seniors. You have to have an MOU between a developer and a service provider. So a lot of times, especially in the county of Santa Cruz, that service provider is the county itself. So that's County Behavioral Health, and they're a great partner there. And they have to show that they have experience. And if you're working with a third party that is not the county, then you're working with another agency. And I'm gonna say this, experience is expensive. And you have to comply with the housing first model. So they're using the coordinated entry system. So there is no lease up lottery type of thing. It's mostly like you're gonna be referred to an agency, probably the county. That referral is gonna come to the lease up organization. They're gonna say, this person qualifies, great. They're gonna send that information to the housing authority. They're gonna say like, yes, we can give them a voucher, and then they can move in. It's a long process. It's sadly very long, and in other jurisdictions it takes even longer. So now that I identified the site, I have a site, I know who's gonna live there, I know who I'm building for, I have to entitle it. So I have to design it, we have to design it, we have to make sure we do all the environmental reports, to go through the CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, right? Great, thank you. And that's if you get federal financing. So if you're gonna get those vouchers, that's a federal source. So you have to do a NEPA. You have to go through those conditions of approval, which we just went through. You do community outreach. So you go talk to your neighbors, you talk to current residents if there's a building there right now. You talk to other partners that can be other advocate organizations or just partners. So the church is a partner with me for one of my developments right now. And some local politicians, because you want to make sure that they have some buy-in on the project too. They're going to be your advocate as well. And then you go get your approval once you've met all the criteria of that approval. So you can get approval from a zoning administrator, planning commission, city or county, or other government bodies like the Coastal Commission if you're in the coastal zone, or LAFCO, which is this agency that works with multiple agencies if you have some sort of, like for example, I'm building an unincorporated Santa Cruz County next to Watsonville, and I need to use the Watsonville water. So there's going to be an MOU between the city of Watsonville and the county for that property to use water. Does that make sense? Yeah, and then that's going to go through LAFCO. Okay, so got entitled. Now that I'm entitled, I can go for financing. And there are various financing sources, local, federal, state. Some of it, you'll see some strike-throughs here and you'll see some highlights, and there's reasons for that. So redevelopment agencies were really the main drivers of providing affordable housing units in the county. Those are gone. They were assigned, Governor Barry Brown got rid of those in 2012. Sadly, we lost that. There were some counties that were using the redevelopment agency funds in a not so great way, like building stadiums. Santa Cruz County was not building stadiums. We were building affordable housing. We were building the Simpkins Swim Center, the Boys and Girls Club, and other great, people buildings here, right? That really helped the community. And but that's gone. But we're still very hopeful that this will come back. Local housing trust funds, there are some cities that have some of this. It varies on where you live, on how much there's available. Some cities, like the city of Santa Cruz, are a beneficiary and have discretion over home and CDBG or community development block grant funds. There's also affordable housing bonds. So who remembers 2018, who was here in Measure H? I totally remember that year. And there's local real estate transfer taxes. So those can be on the ballot next year. So keep an eye open for that. Very exciting. On the state side, No Place Like Home was a source that was Prop 2 in 2018. So if you voted yes on that, you voted yes for supportive housing, and about 5 or 6 developments throughout the county got that funding. So that's awesome, thank you. That's permanent supportive housing for people with disabilities who were at risk of being homeless or homeless. But it's gone, it's dried up. So those $2 billion are gone. Multifamily housing program, the infrastructure grant, Joe Cerno Jr. Farm Worker Housing Program, Veterans Housing and Homeless Prevention Program funds, those are going to be on the ballot next year. $10 billion. So please vote yes on that. We definitely need that money. And by the way, Santa Cruz County did get a lot of that allocation of those $4 million that were $4 million that were voted by voters on for Prop 1 in 2018. So we need to see that again. And then there's federal funds. So again, we talked about home and CDBG, but Section 8, that subsidy source that provides a lot of support to families to really fill in that gap for affordable housing, especially if it's tenant-based, or sorry, project-based. The low-income housing tax credit I talked about. The USDA, they don't just regulate your meat. They also provide farm worker housing funds. So that's a great source. However, this is problematic. If you do not have legal status, then there's going to be a problem for you moving into a unit that has federal source on it. Right? So that's where we want to make sure we see a lot of the state sources and local sources as well. So what does it take to actually apply for that money? It takes a lot. See all those folders? That's an actual folder for a tax credit application. And I know tab 3 is repeated. Sorry about that. So you have to show that you have your local approvals, that you went through to, the zoning admin or planning commission to get that done. You have to have those match funds, so those funds from the city, those funds from the state. You have that. You have to show that you have site control. Like, yes, I can build here because this document says I can. You have to have experience. And so this is something where, this is why you see a lot of like the Mid-Penn, the Eden Housings, the Mercy Housings of the world. You see them do this a lot because they have the experience doing this. And I will say that there is an emerging developer set aside in some of the programs out there, so that more developers, especially developers of color, can produce more affordable housing opportunities. And you have to show a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you're providing housing for seniors or for supportive housing needs, you have to show those services commitments, property management, all that. All right. And then, so now I have money, all right? And now I get to get my building permit. And so I have to make sure I submit a complete set of plans to the city or county to make sure that this is complete. So that's gonna have plumbing details, mechanical details, electrical, civil, architectural, to show those studies to make sure that, yes, I can't build here, but I can build here. Or I can't build during this time because there's the wood rat? The wood rat is there. So I have to make sure I study this location a week before I I put a shovel in the ground because I could be invading on the wood rat space. So that's actually a condition of approval that we've seen recently. And then we go out to bid. So the affordable housing industry is not immune to the pricing of affordable housing. We're not immune to the supply chain issues that are happening right now. So we like to get 3 bids, and because we get this federal funding and sometimes local funding, they have those prevailing wage requirements. So that usually makes the price go up a little bit higher, but it's actually a great thing because it helps the local labor force. And Davis-Bacon is the federal version of that. And when we get our pricing back, we're usually a little shocked because it's like, ouch. Okay, I have to pay that much to build my thing. All right, cool. Let's value engineer. What do I absolutely need here to make this project go up? Well, I need windows. Can't get rid of those. But do I need that really nice countertop in all of my units? No. So I'm gonna put that on my wish list because I would rather have a nice countertop in all of those units if I can, because that lasts longer, and I have to build these things to last at least 55 years, right? So we do that, we put that into our general contractor contract, and I pay all those fees, and then groundbreaking. We finally break ground. All right, so that was a few years. We just went through a few years right there. All right, it's not fast. 5 years for our project, yeah. The fastest I've seen an affordable housing project go up from start to actual finish and people like moving in is 4 years. So, and that was Aptos Blue, so that took a while. Okay, but now I'm building, and it doesn't mean I have all of these sources of funds on here. I have these conditions of approval that say certain things that I must do, which is fine. But when I'm getting out of the ground, that's where I have the most unknown. So what am I actually digging into? We have to make sure that those studies were right. One funny story is we were once digging into the ground, and it's like, oh, why is this dirt very muddy? Why is it really wet? Well, unless you had a drone 50 years ago and took pictures of the site every day for 50 years, you wouldn't have known that there were 2 pools there under that. And what they did was just cover them with some wood and soil, and went pretty deep with the soil. And yeah, so we had to demo those 2 pools after we uncovered them. So great. And you wouldn't know unless you had done a drone picture of this site every day for 50 years. And you have a little bit of money set away just in case things like that happen, just in case there's a pool and you're like, oh, okay. And again, our lenders are reviewing all of this stuff. They come in on our monthly draw meetings to make sure, like, yes, this invoice matches. Like, oh, you bought some extra stuff. Where are you storing it? Where is it? And show me proof that if it's offsite that it's insured. They want to see that, or else they won't pay your bill. So they really go down to that detail. The city and county do routine inspections on what they have to do. And it's, again, make sure those conditions of approval, you're building to those conditions of approval. All right, while that's happening, but a little bit later after you're off the ground, you're starting the lease up process. And your property management is really taking the lead on this. So they produce an interest list, which, by the way, usually the day after we get approval for a project, we start getting phone calls saying, like, when is this gonna be done? When are you gonna build this? It is very sad. And you have to look at all the regulatory requirements. So that Joe Center Junior Farm Worker Grant that I told you about, well, that's restricted to farm workers, right? So there's that set aside there that I wanna make sure that those 12 units that I said I was gonna build for farm workers, well, I wanna make sure that I set those 12 units aside and make sure that I get those at least 10 farm workers there, right? I'm gonna have live-work preferences. So usually the county likes to have a live-work preference. So if you live or work in the county of Santa Cruz, then you go to the top of the list. Cities try to do that too, but to make sure that we are still building affirmatively furthering fair housing, we wanna make sure that the demographics of the city match that of the county. So that's the only way you can do a citywide live-work preference. And in some locations, you can even do a school district live-work preference. I've seen that before. Okay, and then you do the intake process. So people turn in their applications. So if you're the first person to turn in their application, so if you're John and he got up at 8 a.m. to make sure that he was the first person in line to turn in his application, he has the same chance as Bruce, who turned in his application at 4:59 p.m. Yeah. To get into that unit on the very last day. To get into that unit, they have an equal chance. So, because maybe he got his group organized, maybe someone drove him, this organization drove him and made sure that he got there, and he was working. He didn't have time, like he just barely made it in. So they all have the same chance for that unit. And then from there, once they lease up all those units, they create the wait list after that. I find this incredibly heartbreaking when you get 3,500 applications for a unit or for affordable housing, which happened in Watsonville. For Pippin Orchards, 46 units were built and 3,500 applications were received. So yes, there is a large need for affordable housing. All right, so we were done. People have moved in. Great. So that took about 2 years-ish, let's say. And so now we have people moving in. We want to make sure that the rents that they're paying are actually the rents that we said they were going to pay, that the AMIs are right, that everything matches up. The operating, that we're operating how we said we were going to operate. So we're going to keep track of those water bills and be like, okay, we said it was going to cost $500 a month to water all of our plants and have water in our community room and all that. But now I'm getting a bill that's $800. That's a problem. And that happens. So we're like, there's either a leak or someone's leaving something on for too long. You apply for welfare tax exemption. That allows for the property to stay affordable. So because nonprofits are building this type of housing, you are eligible for welfare tax exemption, so you don't have to pay property taxes, just assessments. And again, you're still following those conditions of approval. This project right here that you see, Shapiro Knolls, there's a wetlands next door, and we had to maintain the wetlands for 10 years. I think that contract finally expired. That 10-year period is finally done because this project was completed in 2013. And now you're operating. So again, you're paying your property manager for your fees. You have unit turnover that happens. You have over income people. So they're moved in, they stabilized their lives, and then they got a great job. And now they're over income. So there are some rules in the regulatory agreements about how high that over income can be until it's no longer considered an affordable unit. But there are also some protections for that resident. You just can't kick them out because, like, hey, you're over. You can't just kick them out. You're gonna displace someone, and it's really hard to, just because they have over income doesn't mean that they have $100,000 to buy a house now, right? And definitely not in Santa Cruz. And there's monitoring. There's monitoring by the funding sources. There's monitoring by your insurance provider. There's monitoring by the city and county. So there's that. And by the way, insurance has gone up. Talked to an insurance broker on Wednesday. It goes up about at least 10% each year. So yeah, so that's how you get to build affordable housing. And there's a lot of stuff there. I could have spent a whole week on each one of these slides, but yeah, sorry, I didn't have time for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Diana. Back in the hippie days, there was an expression, no one ever said it would be easy, but nobody ever said it would be that complicated either. So it's really a useful thing to take us through that. Our final presenter for this afternoon is Bruce Van Allen, and he's going to talk about a very interesting possibility that speaks to the issue that was raised, I think, early on today by Fred Keeley way back at the beginning. Where is this going to be built? And it's a question that Diana raised as well. Bruce develops software to support progressive political organizing and public interest research. He's worked for decades on river restoration, the arts, tenants' rights, affordable housing, and sustainable transportation. He has held numerous positions of leadership and trust, including as mayor of Santa Cruz, and he currently serves as elected trustee and president of the Santa Cruz Board of Education. He's happy to report that he's celebrating his 37th year without owning a car, and hopes that you'll visit one of the software projects, the Santa Cruz Community Calendar. If you just put in the website, no periods, santacruzcommunitycalendar.org. So here's Bruce. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you everybody for coming today and for sticking with this. It's a huge topic, and we've got a lot of miles on us already today. I want to either send us on a special expedition or maybe a foolhardy journey, but one way or another, what I want to get at is that in spite of, let me mention one more thing, which is that I manage several affordable subsidized housing projects in the aftermath of the Santa Cruz earthquake in the early 90s. And so I've been through what Diana has just described. I had one project with 12 different financing sources, loans, foundations, grants, earthquake money, Red Cross money, and so on. I have incredible admiration for the people that work in affordable housing development. It is really hard. It's not even in the same realm as if you had the money and built your own house and where you had a construction loan and then a mortgage. It's so much more complicated than that. So thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
So in spite of the best efforts of our low-income housing developers, our commercial or market rate developers that do try to add some affordability, our city is committed to things. There's people talking about a finance measure. There's landlords that at least show up at community discussions about affordability. But I'm sorry, the actual, in effect, de facto policy of our community, if you add all these players and all these factors together, is our way of addressing affordability is displacement. That is the biggest scale response of our community to housing cost is pushing people onto the streets or out of town. That's the biggest phenomenon. So what do we do about that? I think that we are not nearly serious enough about this crisis. And what I want to suggest is that, and I want to challenge our city and possibly our county to take on the housing affordability crisis at the same level that we did the earthquake recovery in the 90s. And I'll say more about that process in a little bit. But these are not acceptable as being normal times or where the normal things that we do, including the extra efforts for affordability that we're talking about, are sufficient. They're not sufficient. So what I would like in the big picture is for the city to embark on a housing crisis, a housing affordability crisis regime, drop a bunch of other stuff and really focus on this. And I'll be bringing this challenge forward. I'm hoping other people will join me in this, but in thinking about it, I would like to have an idea of, well, what would that mean aside from all the hard work that we're already doing? And one of them is to trust the people of Santa Cruz a little bit more than the way things work now. Do not trust them, which is instead of top down, whether it's from the state, whether it's even from City Hall, or whether it's from private investors, what about starting with the people in the neighborhoods? And so let's take a little journey here. What if the city were to say, we would like to have 4,000 more affordable units? So not necessarily building new housing as much as maybe converting existing housing to social ownership or to subsidized or other ways of making it affordable, subsidize either the housing or the tenants. And then if we wanted that many units, then remember what Fred said about building 40% of all those 3,700 new units in the downtown and spreading the other 60% around the city. Well, he was talking about just new units. Okay, now I'm talking about spreading the responsibility for affordability all around the city. Okay, so here's the concept: neighborhood affordability plans. Right now, under general plans, cities and counties can have something called a specific area plan. And that's where the city goes through a special process with hearings and involvement of the public and studies and designates a certain area for a certain kind of development because that's what that community wants at that time. Specific area plan, okay. So here's a neighborhood area plan. Imagine if the people, the renters and owners in a given neighborhood, and I don't mean the whole big town, I mean, a few blocks around, like a few blocks around here or something like that. Imagine those people got together with the city endorsing it and maybe providing some technical services, and those people in that neighborhood were able to look around and figure out how could we add affordability in our neighborhood. And again, maybe that's new units or added, accessory dwellings, but maybe it's conversion of some existing housing, or maybe it's even conversion some old warehouse or something like that that happens to be in the neighborhood. If that neighborhood could come up with its fair share of the added affordability that we need across the whole city, maybe they get to have that plan. Think about that. If your neighborhood could add, your block could add 5 units of permanent, durable, affordable housing by either accepting in a way that works for your neighborhood that it could be built and added, or finding ways with the city, again, helping to convert some existing housing to subsidize or to affordability. Why not let those neighborhoods have that plan? Now, there could be a lot of spin-off benefits. One of them is that perhaps the owners in that neighborhood could actually help provide a little bit of their equity to help finance that low-income housing. Anchor the bank loans so that somebody doesn't have to go out on the Wall Street market for that loan. Imagine also that there would be other things in a given neighborhood that could be addressed if the neighborhood had the incentive to come together and make a plan. For example, the storm drain that down at the end of the block always floods. You know, okay, well, the city is now sanctioning this process, and the city is committed to say, if you identify a public works problem, we will put that into our capital improvement plan and plan to fix it and commit because your neighborhood has identified that and planned it for us. Or thinking a little bit further along, if you imagine on a city block down the middle of the block where there's basically back fences and trash cans and stuff, what if the city were to help the people on that block get an easement down the middle of the block that provided the space for rainwater catchments and cisterns that then they could water their gardens with? Or an array of solar panels that would go into batteries, or going back to the kind of whole earth catalog days, maybe the solar power pumps the water from the cistern up to a tank up high, and so then you have water pressure for your water, and if you use that water, it comes back down through a dynamo and generates power. And so that block could actually be more self-sufficient with water, help groundwater, because that's where that water could go instead of going out down the storm drains and over to the river, and could also be more sustainable in terms of their energy consumption, and could be able to have the satisfaction that they have done their part. Because you know what? If you go into a neighborhood right now that's against some development that's being done to them because it's coming from above, whether it's the state or the investor or whomever, they're going to be angry about it, they're going to want changes, or they're going to not want it at all. But if they created that plan themselves and said this would work in our neighborhood, including maybe a 3-story building or a 5-story building out there on the corner of the big street where they arrange it so that the parking from that doesn't dominate our neighborhood, and the sunlight is still, you know, reach somebody's garden and stuff like that, so that it's acceptable to the broader neighborhood, why not? Why shouldn't they be allowed to have that plan? So this is totally utopian. I don't know of any place in the world that has done this except for places that don't have planning departments and don't have investors circling for profit opportunities. So no good example that would apply to us. Let me go back to the high level. The city has to declare an affordability crisis. And again, I'm not talking about necessarily building more. I'm not talking about how do we satisfy those state requirements. I'm not going to use any adjectives. But rather, how can we make our town durably affordable for the people that live and work and retire and go to school here? That's what I think we should do. And I think we should be not accepting the very hard work as enough, the very hard work that Diana does, the very hard work that our planning department and our economic development department do, and that Housing Santa Cruz County does, and all these other groups. It's just not enough. This is an absolute crisis of displacement, and that's bad. That hurts everybody. And I know I am not the only renter in this room who is in a very precarious state because rent keeps going up and it is not keeping pace with wages. Now, you want another organizing opportunity, let's work on wages. That's also clearly important in our capitalist setup here. But I would like it. So what I'm offering today, aside from this wacky utopian idea, is I'm going to convene a discussion group. And so I'd like anybody here that wants to be part of a further discussion about could we actually make something like neighborhood affordability planning work. Let's talk about it and let's get this going, because otherwise, in spite of all the good things we've heard about today, we're losing. Displacement is happening more rapidly than we're catching up to it. So anyway, that's my wild idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce, and I'm sure that raises a lot of interesting questions. Santa Cruz thinks outside the box, and Bruce leads the way. And we work very hard at affordable housing, and Diana is certainly one of the leaders in that. So, first question is Doris.
Me again. My question is for Diana. Why, so what's the cost per unit now to build these? It's exceeding at least 700K from what I'm understanding. Is that a true statement? To
Yeah.
build an affordable unit?
It is.
I have this crazy idea to eliminate all inclusionary housing. Get rid of it. Go back to in lieu fees. Developers pay in lieu. Yeah, everybody understands what that is. They basically pay into an affordable house. Instead of building affordable units at 700K plus a unit, they pay into a fund that can go fund other affordable housing. So you take that, you take these, whatever affordable housing funds that you are so skilled at drumming up, plus the in lieu fees from new developments that are all market rate, by the way. And instead of spending 700K a unit, go buy existing older apartment complexes. There's one on San Lorenzo right now, 24 units you could have for $291K a door. Okay, it's not gonna have radiant floors, it's not gonna have granite countertops. Let the market rate Google and Apple engineers pay for that. And oh, by the way, through paying through their for that market rate housing, they're actually indirectly paying for the in lieu fees to buy the cheap $291K a door. And you go, and all of that, I mean, 70% of your presentation was all of the activities required and expenses prior to putting a shovel in the ground. All that's eliminated. You can take down, instead of 4 years, 7 years, you can do it within, how long does it take to close escrow? 60 days. And you get twice as many units, right, for the same amount of affordable housing. And I just don't see that happening. It's like, why go fight this beast which is and the costs keep increasing every year. And we're gonna get to I think it's $1 million a unit now in San Francisco. It's like, again, people are just glad to have an affordable roof over their head. It doesn't have to be brand new on the corner of Front and Laurel. So can you answer why that's not a model and why that's not being looked at?
Well, there are several answers to that, and I'll give you a couple, and I know Bruce has a response for you as well. So you're right. I could just go buy a house, say it's affordable, but what's going to regulate that? And how do I know if it's going to be for a homeless person, and if they have some past trauma like PTSD, how do I know they're getting the services that they're needed? So that total development cost, that $700K, that $1 million per door cost, is more than just the construction costs. It's also just the providing the services that they need, because you're creating reserves for that. It's also providing reserves to make sure that you can replace certain things within that building. You're creating these reserves, right? Not all of it, right? But it's a good chunk of that. And you want to make sure it's regulated so that it stays affordable, because I could decide to sell it to someone else, and then they could be like, you know what? I don't want it to be affordable. I want it to be market rate, and I'm going to sell it to someone who's market rate, and I'm going to keep this person out. So I think that deed restricted affordable housing does that. Those regulatory agreements, those that come with the financing, are really important. And in lieu fee, the model, there have been studies of that show that in cities where it does work and in cities where it doesn't work, there's a number there, and it really it varies by jurisdiction. So, for example, in Watsonville and in Santa Cruz, they did that study, and it said, like, if you're going to build more than 7 units, then that in lieu fee doesn't work. So I'm just going to require it. So it really, really depends on the jurisdiction. It really depends on what the intentions are for that person and what you really are planning for in the long term for whoever you want to live there.
But you're addressing permanent supportive housing. We've talked about that earlier with the services. The butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers of Santa Cruz don't need that. Most of them don't. So they just want an affordable
You're
place.
right. Trustee General may not need that, but you're right. But their kid may need some after-school programs, and that costs money.
All right, let's not get into.
But yeah, we can talk separately about this, and I'm going to let Bruce.
One question at a time, and we have Bruce speaking as well. So
it's actually a good question, because the economics of housing are complicated, and sometimes money is easier to work with than some other ingredient. So here's some of the reasons that when we wrote those measures, Measure J in the county and Measure O in the city, with the minimum inclusionary requirement percentage, We did it as that for two reasons. One, because when we researched it, the in lieu fees were never nearly as much. Now that could be a local decision. They could be made high enough that they would actually seriously contribute to, for example, purchasing and putting it into public ownership or something like that. The second one was more the philosophy of inclusionary housing. And some of this comes from the European experience and some from the bad experience in some parts of the US, was that if you don't include it in each development, then it's all going to get segregated into other neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods where the market development is going are going to stay wealthier and probably whiter and more exclusionary. And so the idea of inclusionary was to spread around throughout the community and to get a mixture of incomes in lots of neighborhoods. And I think that's actually, in Europe, that's been shown to have a benign benefit for the people in neighborhoods that are mixed income. So there's some value in that. But and then over the years here in Santa Cruz, the experience was that developers continuously harped on that the inclusionary requirement was too hard for them to accomplish. They couldn't make the project pencil out if they had to include the $700,000 affordable units. And so they began to eat away at the inclusionary requirement and shift it so that both the city and the county have at times allowed a certain amount of that to be covered by in lieu fees. And for those of us in the affordable housing movement around here, that was considered a defeat, because the in lieu fees don't add up to as much as getting the whole units. In other words, the in lieu fee wouldn't be $700,000.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really add up to enough. But if we were going to go embark on the neighborhood affordability planning idea that I was spinning out earlier, then I think we would look for every possible creative way to make the money work. And an in lieu fee from a development down the street might actually be the way that it works for that neighborhood. So again, to me, it's like, let's be creative, let's trust the people of the community to apply themselves and come up with the best solutions for their neighborhoods.
Thanks to you both. Michael?
So, Bruce, there's a part of your neighborhood affordability plan that I need a little bit more fleshing out. I'd like to think that the good people of Santa Cruz, neighborhood by neighborhood, would say, yeah, let's get on board with this. We have a civic responsibility to house people. Let's let's take care of our share. But I think, so many people will have the feeling, well, I like our neighborhood as it is. I don't want it to change. Kind of not in my backyard. So what would be the incentive for people to say, yes, let's be part of this?
I have a couple of things. First of all, remember what I said, which is that adding affordability doesn't necessarily mean adding more buildings. And so if the neighborhood were to say, well, there's one big house down the streets, let's convert it to affordability. No change in the structure in the street, and probably fewer parked cars for that matter, if you made that change. So some of it is just about what would work in the neighborhood as it exists.
What would be the incentive for neighbors?
Oh, yes, thank you. So one possibility is we're talking about some kind of a housing tax. We're talking about a transfer tax or a parcel tax or something like that coming up. But what if your neighborhood, you come up with your plan, once the affordability part of your plan is actually in place, then the owners in your neighborhood are exempt from that added tax. In other words, or even more extreme, you know how we're getting all these state top-down requirements for adding more housing? What if the city were to say, yeah, we're going to take those 3,700 units, we're going to put a bunch of them downtown, every other neighborhood in the city has to absorb their number of units. Doesn't that become an incentive for those neighborhoods that start thinking about how to do that? And so I would say, if you do it affordability, then our city is going to go to bat for you in Sacramento and make an exception to that requirement that it just be new construction and just say new affordability. That's really what we need. It's not new construction, it's new affordability. Anyway, so there's a partial answer. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bill. I'll start with Bruce's point of making progress on this without building additional structures.
I'm
not saying don't build any, I'm saying that that doesn't have to be the only way to get affordable.
Yeah, so this is a sliver of the problem. Bakersfield has eliminated homelessness in their community. There are no homeless people in the city of Bakersfield at this time. And they did that without building any structures. They also did that without, yeah, I'll just stay there. Understandably, and without criticism of anyone, we live in a fairly adversarial culture. My take on the success in Bakersfield is it was collaboration. They found a way to collaborate with housing providers. So they essentially indemnified housing providers, landlords, from liability as a consequence of housing people, housing the least interesting segment of people in need of housing for landlords, the most difficult. So what was required? Stop me if I'm taking too much time.
Well, if you can get to the question, that would be good.
Yeah, okay. So that's, really, I just have a suggestion that a collaborative approach can yield very positive results.
My point about the
reason I mentioned the post-earthquake recovery, I'm sure some people were here for that in the aftermath of the 1989 earthquake. The city put together, with incredible leadership from city and county elected officials, a 36-member board that had really broad representation. It was carefully composed from the business community, neighborhoods. I was the environmental representative. There were affordable housing advocates. There were bankers. There were progressive activists and so on. So all parts of the community on the 36-member board. It was called Vision Santa Cruz. And we came to an incredible consensus that no one had believed was going to happen when we started. There were literally people who could not speak to each other on that board together thrown in to try to come to a community consensus about how to recover from the earthquake. And we fucking did it. This was one of the best downtown recoveries from a disaster in the state's history. And we did it exactly for Bill's point, because we said, this is so serious, we have to collaborate. We have to leave our weapons at the door and get together and figure this out together. It's the only way it's going to happen. And that's what I'm saying is exactly what we need now on the question of affordable housing. It's just a slower process emergency, but it's just as big, if not bigger, as the earthquake.
I also think you have to look at the demographics of Bakersfield and not just how they look, but also their income demographics. Bakersfield definitely is a more affordable community. The AMIs are definitely a lot lower. The demographics are a little bit more leaning toward people that look like me. And so, that discussion, you have to keep those things in mind about what it means to have a community response. And yeah, it does take some leadership for sure to really start that, but it's really a citizens initiative to say like, hey, I'm gonna open up my door to a homeless individual. I would love for more people to say, I'm gonna open up my door for a homeless individual, a farm worker, whatnot. And if you have one, let me know, for sure, we need that. Right now I'm banking on Bruce to, age 10 years so we can qualify for that senior housing. So, but yeah, I think it's really being mindful of those things too.
Okay, go ahead, your name and question.
I'm Jane Calbreth. I'm a renter. I'm a senior. Why haven't we heard anything about senior housing challenges?
I think we did hear a little bit from Diana, but.
Yeah, I will say that there was a major effort in about 5, 6, 7 years ago to build more senior housing, affordable senior housing, and again, there's those age requirements, right? They were calling, especially in the housing world, they were calling it the silver tsunami, because all the boomers were starting to become of a retirement age or getting to their golden years in life, right, if you will, the 60s, 70s, and beyond. And so I think you're right. I think we definitely need to have more senior housing in Santa Cruz County. When St. Stephen's was built, that was the last senior housing development that was done of new construction for seniors in over 10 years. And I haven't seen that since, and that was completed in 2015, 2016. So it's almost been another 10 years, and that was only 40 units of affordable housing. Assisted living does not count as senior housing. That is, it doesn't even count towards the housing element. So we definitely need to address those senior housing needs. And I'm all with you. It's it has very similar challenges to permanent supportive housing because you do have to provide a little bit more services, but it's not much different. And great. Those are great neighbors. I love seniors. They're the best to work with.
Yeah, and a lot of us from the 70s don't want to live in senior housing. I'm talking intergenerational, more community, and helping one another and getting along and not being isolated, sharing everything, you know, more like the community. And I have a few ideas of places where I've heard successful things like that happening.
This is, again, there are a lot of people who are housing rich but cash poor in Santa Cruz because they bought a long time ago, but their income is not, maybe they're retired now or their income is from a job that doesn't pay that well, but they do own. Those are the people that might very well, if it's a big house, maybe their kids have moved out, that if the neighborhood got together and came up with a way to make it work for those people in that home and the surrounding neighborhood, that's the kind of creative thing that we could have. And there are whole movements across this country, and I think in Europe, of encouraging that kind of intergenerational gathering in houses that otherwise people are kind of rattling around in.
Yeah.
You know, and they're lonely too, possibly. So
There are great models. I lived half my life in Marin County, and they have some new programs there for helping people share housing.
Yeah, and I will add to that, there was, in Massachusetts, there's a treehouse model where there is intergenerational housing that's affordable, so de-restricted affordable. And there are challenges with that. We're trying to do that here in California, but legislation needs to pass to make that happen, to make that possible, to allow a community that is both senior and, you know, transition age youth, which is a really hard to house population. And there are definitely lessons learned that age-out foster youth can learn from seniors. And also just family housing who can be like, hey, there are some people, potential grandparents over there that we can adopt, who can, you know, take care of you when we need them in an emergency. But unfortunately, it takes legislation to get there.
For a second there, I thought you said tree houses, and I said, I live in a tree house.
I know that co-housing and mechanisms for creating support for affordable housing as part of co-housing. Co-housing is already a natural model. So
We have some around here too.
and we have some around here. My daughter's living one in Oakland, which is really good and interesting.
My name is Hector Marin as well. I'm a community organizer here in Santa Cruz, UCSC alumnus, so shouts out and slugs as well. And I'm also a former Latino city council candidate as well, you know, for District 4. And concurrently, I'm currently working with a circle of anti-racism and economic and social justice, and we just got an equity initiative passed throughout the county, which was unanimously passed at the Board of Supervisors right now. So that's amazing, you know, I hear the little plaza, so let's give it up for equity, you know? Hell yeah. And my one question that I have towards the panel is that I have, there's a lot of people in here that have different perspectives. We're trying to focus on how do we go forward, how do we move forward. But I think in order for us to move forward, we also have to take a step back and also think about, things that we want to work on as well. There's this whole, maybe this is like a really broad question or a really, complicated question, but there's like the YIMBY side, then there's the NIMBY side, right? Then there's folks. And there's that argument that's being partaken on, and in my opinion, I feel like that kind of debate that debate really, it distracts our people from the fact that gentrification is going on within our comunidades, right, which disrupts equity. So my main question is, how do we ensure racial equity, and how do we ensure that we invite community members that are diverse within the city, while also ensuring that we create more opportunities in housing?
Let me just conclude, in fact, two questions I took it from you, with a question to Diana, which is really relevant, I think, to what you specifically presented on, and then we'll move to the general questions, Amy, and then Hector's. One question is, what percentage of the costs of construction of affordable housing, you know, that 700,000, is the preparatory work up to the point where you put the shovel in the ground, and hopefully you do in the gopher while you're doing it. I mean, so what percentage of the 700,000 is before construction begins, and then also how much might we expect to save in lowering construction costs of affordable housing units by streamlining the process, but in a way that would not put down community input, would not compromise the environment, and so forth. Maybe that's zero, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
All right, so, God, how much have we spent on your project alone? It's been a lot, but typically what I'm used to seeing, and this is pre the laws that passed, the streamlining laws that passed, like SB 35, SB 330, AB 2162, all of that, you know, you were spending $2 to $3 million on an affordable housing development to move forward with the process. And this is before the inflation of the cost of construction. And so that was pretty typical. Again, it was just to make sure that all of these things were done, which we still do today. We still do all of those environmental reports and whatever, but then we get challenged, and so it's like, we gotta do another one because they didn't like this one, and they want us to use this other consultant, so we got another one, and we got another one because they wanted to see like 5 different studies before we move forward with a development. And now it's like, okay, well, we can use that when that works. And so that is a big portion of the cost, and again, while you're doing that, you're also holding to the land, right? The land, if you are working with a city, they're taking care of it. But if you're working with a regular Joe, and if you bought it, for example, Superior Knolls, we bought that property 5-6 years before it was developed. You know, there's an ordinance at the time that from the county that said you have to mow the lawn every 3 months because we don't want people to like start squatting there in like those really tall grasses. And we're like, okay, fine. So we would do that, and it would also like encourage dumping of stuff, that kind of stuff. We want to discourage that dumping or people like being in buildings or just dumping stuff. Like one of the properties, like one day we drove around right to there, and there's mattresses there. It's like 5 mattresses. Why were there 5 mattresses? I don't know. There are 5 mattresses that were being dumped. So there's the holding cost of the land as well. So yeah, it's not, it's not like 10%, but it is a significant percentage, and those laws have enabled us to move forward a bit. And then the other question was related to making things, how to lower costs with some new strategies and ensuring that people get the community input that they want. Well, I think a lot of that is some of the strategies that we have done is gone door to door. Like, we're gonna go talk to this neighbor, we're gonna go knock on their door, hope they're there. We've done that on a Saturday, we've done that on a Tuesday night, or we've done that on a Tuesday morning, depending on, everyone's schedule is different. And just hearing their input, that's very beneficial. Hearing, your district supervisor or now city council member, it's like, hey, like, I want to get your input. Who should we talk to next? That's a question we would always ask. Is there anyone else that we should talk to about this development? We would always make sure that we ask that question before we left our city council member and say, like, hey, maybe you know a little bit more than we do, especially if we were not new to that neighborhood, although when you're local it helps. and having that feedback and then showing that as part of your community meeting process and showing options during a community meeting is actually really helpful. One of the things that, very simple, that we showed during the Trustee Street community meeting was like, all right, I want your input on the colors of the building. I know it's very simple. I can't really change the building too much. I can't make it circular shaped. I can't have a star-shaped building as cool as I think that would be. But I have a simple input like, do you want these blue, gray colors, or do you want these green and brown colors? And it's the kind of input that they would like to hear. And sometimes it's as simple as that. Making sure that you have options during those community meetings so that you don't have to do another community meeting later on and be like, oh, I don't like that. So presenting options is always very helpful.
Thank you to the panelists, all of them, so much, deeply appreciated, and to all of you really for coming.